Good morning, everyone. My name is Megan White, and I'm the Deputy Director of Programs at the New York State Council on the Arts. Welcome to our Support for Artists webinar. We are so excited to be joined today by hundreds of attendees from across all 10 regions of the state. We're also immensely grateful for the recognition in our sector, as is reflected in Governor Hochul and the New York State Legislature's investment of $127 million for the arts in FY2024. This was a team effort. I want to thank all of you for your work in reaching your legislators and local media regarding arts funding. NYSCA launched our FY2024 guidelines and application manual on May 16th. We highly encourage all applicants to read these guidelines thoroughly before reaching staff with questions and attending webinars and office hours. These materials can be found on the NYSCA website under the For Applicants tab. Today's webinar will be an overview of our FY2024 Support for Artists opportunity. We will cover topics such as eligibility, key dates, and the application process. Many thanks to those of you who submitted questions in advance. We will have a dedicated Q&A session following the presentation, and you can still submit questions through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We encourage you, however, to listen to the entire presentation before submitting your questions today. We also have budgeted time to go over should we receive a lot of questions and as your schedule allows. A reminder that this webinar will also be recorded and posted on the NYSCA website. We will share that link with you all when it's live. I'm now pleased to introduce NYSCA Program Directors Ariane Blanco and Christine Leahy, who will take us through the opportunity. Welcome, Ariane and Christine.
Thanks so much, Megan. So I know there are two types of folks who are joining us this morning: artists who are interested in applying for this opportunity and staff from sponsoring organizations. So the first step applies to the sponsoring organizations. You need to make sure that your organization is pre-qualified in New York State's Grants Gateway. This is a statewide requirement for all entities that hope to do business with the state of New York. And if you have not begun the process, now is the time to start. It is a requirement. You have to be pre-qualified by the time of the application deadline. If you are new to this process, I especially encourage you to get going as soon as you can. It's a longer process the first time that you do it, and there's sometimes a back and forth and at least a week before your materials are turned around and approved. If you are a returning applicant, again, this applies to the sponsors only, you still have to make sure that the documents in your vault are current. There are documents that have to be updated annually. So please check your vault, see what you might need to update before the application deadline. And if you have any questions about this, you can email our help desk, help@arts.ny.gov. Again, this applies to sponsoring organizations. Artists themselves do not need to be pre-qualified. So this is an overview of our timeline. The guidelines are already posted and up. Our application portal opens today, and the deadline is July 13th at 4 p.m. sharp. Now, artists, your sponsor probably wants your materials before that deadline day, so please check with them and work together so that you have established when they need your materials so that they can submit on your behalf by July 13th, 4 p.m. sharp. And sponsoring organizations, please know that it really is 4 p.m. sharp. If you try to submit at 4:01 or 4:02, you will be locked out. Then the announcement for these awards will be by December 2023. And everything that you need to know is already up and online, so you can all get working on what you need to get working on. So to be eligible to serve as a sponsor for an artist, you need to be a nonprofit organization that's incorporated in or registered to do business in New York State, or you can be a Native American tribe or a unit of local government. Your principal place of business should be located in New York State. If you're a sponsor, please review some additional eligibility guidelines that are listed online in our guidelines document. As a state agency, we have funding priorities. And the way that those priorities are expressed in our individual artists category are as follows. Our agency is committed to providing opportunities for artists at all stages in their careers to continue to develop and to present their work. This category seeks to enhance the vibrant and diverse artistic voices of New York State-based art makers. It invests in projects that represent significant growth in the artistic development of individual artists. And where appropriate, it can also strengthen the relationship between an individual artist and the artistic goals and mission of the sponsoring or commissioning organization. NYSCA Support for Artists offers support in the discipline areas that you see listed here on the slide. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Ariane.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christine. Yes, as you can see here, we have 8 areas that we are providing essentially our creative support for artists grants for. Just note that in every case, these grants are structured as a creative grant to be paid to the lead artist for devising, developing, or otherwise completing new work. These are not production grants or grants intended to pay for programs that you might be producing. Contractually, this creative work is to occur between January and December of 2024. Very important to select the correct artistic area, as they're listed here, that best aligns with the project you're seeking funds for, as this will determine which panel will review the request and what specific support materials are required to be submitted as part of the application. And more on that in a little bit. Next slide, please. If you're successful, awards will be $10,000. While no matching amount is required, if the applicant proposes work, such as like a large-scale film work or other kind of devised large-scale work that will require more resources than the grant can offer, you want to explain how financially you're going to be able to complete that work in the application. Keep that in mind. Applicant artists must be 18 years or older and a New York State resident as of the application deadline. We fund a year out, meaning that applications made during this year is for creative activities occurring next year, right, during the current grant cycle here. For questions, of course, please contact program staff in the funding area that most aligns with your artistic work. And of course, there's a link to the full staff contact information there. And under their title, you'll see what area of expertise or area of focus our various staff members are responsible for, whether it's theater, music, etc. Next slide, please. Okay, as we said before, artists don't apply directly, and so you're responsible for applying through working with a fiscal sponsor. So it's like a two-way relationship here, right? And so this is the sponsoring organization responsibilities. You know, as NYSCA cannot make grants directly, each applicant must be sponsored. Grants are awarded to the sponsoring organization, which then directs the funds to the artist. Eligible fiscal sponsors are nonprofit organizations incorporated or registered to do business in New York State, as Christine had stated that earlier. Such organizations must be fully pre-qualified in grants gateway, okay? And the sponsor organization may serve as a fiscal agent and limit the role for receiving and dispersing the reporting and reporting on the grant, or the organization may provide additional fiscal, administrative, and production services to the artist they sponsor. Both kinds of relationship are acceptable. Important to note, sponsoring organizations other than service organizations may request support for only one creative grant in each area of support per year. So that would be, if you're a theater company that produces work, for example, you can submit for one request in each of our 8 different discipline areas. Just keep in mind that while the grant is $10,000, that $500 of it may be kept by the organization as an administrative fee to service the grant. Other responsibilities include submitting a final report on the grant after the end of the contract period and issue 1099 forms as required, as these creative grants are earned income. And now we come back to this slide, sponsored artist responsibilities. So is part of the two-way street. So these are the responsibilities as a sponsored artist you should keep in mind to make sure you're successful in getting your application in. Just recognizing that when selecting a sponsor, it's best practice that the artist understand the role of the sponsor organization. What are they going to provide? What are they not going to provide? Working with the sponsor organization regarding the submission of the application, getting the materials together so they have all the information they need to submit it on your behalf. Supplying the sponsor organization with complete application narrative and any relevant support materials, including the proof of residency that's articulated in the guidelines. And as well, you want to keep yourself appraised of all NYSCA sponsoring organization deadlines. And again, remember that your sponsor may require an earlier deadline, so they have time to submit the materials. Should you be successful upon receiving a grant, making sure that proper NYSCA credit is noted in your programs and other materials as appropriate. Also offering a public access serving a New York State audience during the grant period. Okay, while these are creative grants, they're not production grants, you do have a public performance component. So you want to make sure that that can be fulfilled within the grant period, ideally. And again, it's a very low threshold. It can be basically of a work in progress presentation of the work. It could be a talk of your creative process while you're still working through the work, even though it's not complete, for example. It can be in person or online. But the key element here is that it's accessible to, it's open and accessible to a New York State audience. Just keep in mind, artistic control and rights of your proposed project should rest and be maintained by the artist. The organization, because they're serving as a fiscal sponsor, doesn't simply get to keep the rights to your material, your creative material. Next slide, please. Okay, registration questions. These are filled out by the sponsoring organization online. So we have text boxes online in the application portal. They're filled out. And these particular questions pertain to information about the sponsoring organization, not the sponsored artist. It's the sponsor organization information. And you can see pages 10 of 11 for the full list of what this information is. It includes things like name of the organization, key contact, website, address, phone number, and some audience statistical information, again, as it relates to the sponsoring organization. Next slide, please. Sponsor request questions, they're filled out by the sponsor organization as well online in the application portal, but these questions pertain to the information about the sponsored artist and the project. So if you're a sponsored artist, this is where you start to provide this kind of information that they're going to need. You'll provide it offline that they're going to need to fill it into the application portal. Okay. Note that when the sponsor is submitting the application, they're verifying things like that the sponsored artist is not on the staff of the board or board member of the sponsor organization. They're verifying that the lead artist named the application did not apply last year. They're also making sure that you're a current New York State resident, of course. And then the other information includes project title that's to be provided. That's 100 characters long, and project description that's provided on behalf of the project. That's 250 characters long. Okay, and remember, characters are not words. They're letters, punctuation, special characters. Those are characters. In terms of the project description, think of it as a press-ready sort of short blurb about your proposed project. Again, funded projects will be awarded $10,000, and the organization, of course, is able to keep up to 500. In some cases, they might want to give it all to the artist, so there is a section where they would fill out the fee up to 500. They could put 0. And then, of course, there'll be the artistic area from the drop-down box that they would select. Next slide, please. Okay, now we get into the guts of what we call the sponsored artist application packet that you as a sponsored artist are responsible essentially to put together and provide to the sponsoring organization. So the first element of this single multi-page PDF document that you're going to put together is your narrative application, your narrative section of your application. And the way you do it is on a self-produced document, you speak to the following points as related to your proposed project. We're looking at it to be no longer than 10,000 characters total. That's about 2.5 pages, single space. The first bullet is include the project title, right on the top. Then you go on to speak to these next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bullets. Describing the project, provide a statement. We say written by the lead artist to make sure that you want to ensure that the artistic voice of the artist that's requesting the funding is part of the application. In some cases, development folks will assist, but we want to make sure that it's the artist's voice that's part of this application. And then the other section is to list and describe each of the work samples. Usually they could be static or media or both, depending on, again, which artistic discipline you're applying under. So you want to speak to that, kind of introducing what the panel will see ultimately with those work samples and how they're related to your proposed work. Of course, highlight the individual team, the individual or team, and the related skills. Some cases, it's a singular playwright writing a play. That's the team, right? But in other cases, especially with media project, there are other key collaborators, even though one person is named as the lead artist, that make up the sort of creative group for the project. And so you want to definitely, in those cases, speak to your team. Okay, and we already went over the requirement of a public performance component. And then finally, you want to articulate any novel approaches to public engagement with regards to the creative process or the public presentation of the proposed project. How are you engaging with the community that maybe this particular project seeks to be presented to? Again, it's an essay format. My suggestion is you develop your essay answering each bullet in order. And you can allocate more characters or less to each of these bullets depending on how applicable it is to your particular request. So that's the flexibility we're trying to achieve here. In some cases, some folks will put like a shorthand of each of the bullets and then fill it in. And in some cases, that helps folks organize their application. Ultimately, this is essentially your pitch to the panel in terms of why we should be getting behind this project with a creative fee of $10,000 at this time. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, the next piece of your application packet will include support materials. Okay, and now every artistic discipline of the 8 has different requirements. Just keep in mind, in some cases they're required, in some cases they're optional. Make sure that the required materials are in the application packet that you're going to submit. Also, if we're not asking for it, don't provide it. It will just muddle your packet in terms of making it harder for the panel to get through your materials. So things like, for example, folks will sometimes provide letters of recommendation or reviews and write-ups of past projects. We don't ask for that, so just don't submit it. And again, each of our discipline areas has their own section in the guidelines that speak to the specific materials that we're asking you to submit. That being said, that's page 13 and 18 of the support for artists guidelines. Now, with the video samples that many of you will provide, you don't upload the video sample. You create a links page, a blank piece of paper. You can title it links page, where you will list links for us to have access to those video samples. Now, we have time constraints articulated in the guidelines, depending on what area you're applying for again, and you want to keep to that. If you have a link to the full sort of length of a project, that's okay, but please tell us in the links page underneath the link, like the timestamp of the time limit you want us to watch. Otherwise, we'll just watch from the beginning to the time limit, and that's it. So that can be okay too, as long as you give us instructions. So the links page should have the title of the piece, maybe the runtime, total runtime, the year, a little blurb about it. Again, you've already discussed it in your application narrative, right? So it's just so we know what we're looking at. And of course, the link. Now, if you have instructions for where to review it, because it's a longer format than what we're asking, then you provide that right underneath it, okay? And please, if we ask for up to 2 links, keep it to 2 links. We have a lot of materials, so we just won't be able to get through additional materials that we're not asking for. And very important, final point on this, make sure that those links are available till the end of this year. Different folks look at it during our deliberation process throughout the year as part of our review, and we want to make sure that it's accessible the whole time. We do ask that it not be password protected. It is shared in terms of the application, and we want to reduce the barriers to accessing it. Also, the risk of a mistake of a password that's incorrect. You can, however, make it private for anyone that has access to the link. That's a way of keeping some privacy while still sharing it with us. All right, thank you. Next slide, please. And Christine, take it away on this.
So once your proposal has been submitted, it is going to be evaluated. There is one criteria for this category, so it's different from our organizational category. And that category is creativity. So your narrative, your support material, everything will be kind of rolled together and taken into consideration in this one category. The box on the screen is our rubric for the benchmarks that panelists are going to be looking at as they evaluate your proposal. It is also listed in our guidelines, and I encourage you as you're putting your materials together to have this rubric available and make sure that you're addressing these benchmarks in your narrative and your materials. Panelists use a 0 to 5 scale in making their rating. So 0 would be, stuff is incomplete, whereas 5 would be all the benchmarks are met or even exceeded. And we have a peer review process for this category as we do with our organizational category. So NYSCA selects a diverse group of professionals from across the state to fulfill these roles. Panelists bring expertise from various disciplines and from various perspectives within each individual discipline, and they also have expertise in nonprofit management. Our nomination process is actually still open right now until tomorrow. So you can nominate yourself to be a peer panel reviewer. You can nominate a colleague or someone who you think would be good at this. Follow this link. And again, this deck will be sent and posted to you after the meeting, so you can find the link then. And remember to do it soon because the nomination window closes tomorrow. All right, now we have some frequently asked questions that we wanted to start off with. Arian, do you want to ask me these questions?
I do. Thank you, Christine. Yes, so these are our preset questions. I'm going to ask the question. Christine's going to answer them in real time, just like a little practice run. And it should be 100% correct because they're right here in front of us. So Christine, as an artist, how do I register in order to apply? How do I get into this opportunity?
You don't have to register as an artist. You will not interact with any of NYSCA's systems at all. That will be done by your sponsoring organization. So you must connect with a New York-based nonprofit organization to be your fiscal sponsor, and they are going to submit everything on your behalf.
I think I get it now. All right, so tell me, how can I find a fiscal sponsor?
So NYSCA doesn't connect artists with sponsors, but there are a couple ways you could go about this. One would be check out the link that's listed here where you can look up recent NYSCA grants, click on the individual artists category, and you will see a list of sponsors that have successfully supported artists before in this category. Keep in mind, it doesn't have to be someone who has sponsored an artist before. It can be any qualified New York State-based nonprofit, but this is a good place to start. Yeah,
and I just want to add on this point that a lot of individual artists, a lot of folks doing our work out there have probably worked with a nonprofit arts organization at some point that you might have a personal relationship with. And they can certainly potentially serve as your fiscal sponsor. Again, they'd have to be pre-qualified, but that's certainly a possibility. So anyway, next question. I have a multi-year grant for organizational support. Can I still serve as a fiscal sponsor for artists?
Yes, if you work for an organization and your organization receives support from NYSCA in our support for organizations category, you're either on a multi-year award or you're planning to apply this year, you can additionally sponsor an artist. You are able to sponsor one artist in each of the discipline areas. unless you're a service organization. If you are a service organization, someone who provides services to artists as part of your mission, then you can support actually multiple artists within each category.
Fantastic. Okay, so, you know, I'm on the board, or in some cases, maybe on the staff of a nonprofit organization. I think I found them. Can this organization serve as my fiscal sponsor?
No, the organization that you work for or that you may serve on the board for cannot be your fiscal sponsor. You are still eligible to apply through a different organization. So you will just have to find someone else to be your fiscal sponsor, but it would be a conflict of interest if the organization you worked for or were on the board of served as your sponsor.
And just to clarify, I just want to say on this point, on staff, so if you're a collaborator that maybe has gotten paid over the years, like say a musician that maybe has been commissioned in the past or worked as a player, maybe contracting especially, but certainly in some cases on payroll, but you're not like a staff member administratively that has say in the organization, that can be okay. Again, if there's a relationship beyond, there is no relationship, you can always call staff to verify sort of if that's okay. So just wanted to clarify on that point as well. You know, I applied last year under support for artists. Can I apply again this year? I'd love to apply again this year.
No, you do have to sit out. So if you applied last year, whether you were successful or not, you're not eligible to apply again this year. This goes for a project as well. If it's a project where a group of artists are collaborating and someone applied on behalf of that project last year for support, someone else associated with that project cannot then apply this year. The project has to sit out as well.
Okay, and the reason for this is we get many more requests that we can ever fund. So we want to ensure that there's opportunity for folks over time to be able to sort of apply and be successful. Also, it serves as a way of you gauging as an artist, is this project ready, you know, competitive enough at this point in my thinking of it to compete for these funds too. Sometimes it might be, you know, more successful if you tactically take this year not to do it. The project is a little farther along where you have more sense of how it's developed and you'll be successful next year instead of having to sit out the next year. Anyway, finally, this is our last one is really more of a public service announcement. Here, you know, we often get, hey, other than the support for artists, where can we get some funding for our work, right? And we do work with numerous partners that offer services, but also re-grant opportunities to artistic funds to artists. And here's a list of those prominent sort of partnerships here that work with NYSCA, New York State Council on the Arts. It's not an exhaustive list, but this is definitely a list of a lot of our programs. And just keep in mind that it's on our website. It also will be available to you as this PowerPoint will be available with the recording of this presentation as well. So don't feel like you have to write all this down now, but.
So if you have additional questions after this webinar, there are other places you can go. For the sponsoring organization, if you have a technical question about pre-qualification or your password or something about, you know, technical about our systems, you can email our help desk, help@arts.ny.gov. And if you are an artist or a staff at a sponsoring organization, you have a question about this opportunity, about the content or the questions or something related to the application, you can contact program staff. And there's a list of program staff on our website. It will say what artistic discipline we're all affiliated with, and you can reach out to the person who's affiliated with the discipline that you work in. Keep in mind that we get very, very busy as the application deadline approaches. That application deadline is July 13th. So we recommend that you submit any questions at least 2 weeks before then to make sure that we have enough time for someone to get back to you. Also note that we can't review a written draft or a draft of material that you will submit for your proposal. We can't review that, but we can answer your questions. So here's our timeline. We're in webinar week right now. Registration links are live if you wanted to register for the one tomorrow. This webinar and all of them are being recorded and will be posted with the slide decks on the NYSCA website. We're also going to have office hours beginning in June, and that schedule will be up soon. So we'll have office hours dedicated to this opportunity, support for artists, as well as office hours for our other opportunities. And so that's an informal option where you can join and be in a breakout room with a NYSCA staff person and other folks who are applying. And that can be useful because, you know, you hear lots of questions that your peers may have. You can ask further questions, you can listen to the conversation, and we hope you take advantage of that opportunity. Of course, you can always reach out to staff, to the help desk. And remember, if you are a sponsoring organization, do not wait to take care of your pre-qualification. Make sure that that is not going to be a hurdle for you as you approach the deadline.
Fantastic. Thank you for all that great information, Christine. And now we're going to move into our live Q&A session. I've been seeing on the chat and the Q&As, a lot of questions popping up. And the format we're going to do is like lightning round style. Christine will be ably asking the hard questions, and I'm going to do my best to answer them as clearly, concisely, and completely as possible. All right, so hopefully I won't get stumped. If I get a little tired, Christine's going to lend a hand. But Christine, what do we have cooking? What's going on? What are some burning questions here?
First up, can an organization apply to sponsor an artist and for support for organizations grant?
Yes, that is perfectly fine. Think of the support for artists as a exempt opportunity. You're really providing in a lot of ways as a sponsor organization a service to get that creative funding through your coffers to that artist. So yes.
If I'm an artist, can I apply for an FY2024 support for artists grant and the NYSCA NYFA fellowship?
Yes, you can. The NYFA fellowships are actually a grant that acknowledges an artist's body of work on 3-year cycles. So that particular opportunity, you can apply on the same year to us and to the NYFA fellowship opportunity.
If I've applied in previous years, can I receive feedback on a previous application ahead of submitting an application this year?
Absolutely. You can always email, you can email me or the staff is most closely associated with your artistic background to provide that feedback, but I will get you to the person, if it's not me, to give you that feedback. Just keep in mind, it's usually scheduled as a phone call. It's done verbally. We don't offer written feedback materials, but we do speak with applicants and are happy to go over past applications.
And what's different from last year's support for artist application?
Christine, I think I'd love for you to take that one.
Sure. I'm going to say there's really not that much difference. So if you are a sponsoring organization and you have sponsored artists previously, you are already familiar with what is up there and with those requirements. The only difference that I would point out is that the new NYSCA mission and values are included in every set of guidelines. We did go through a revision process, so you can check that out. Okay, I'm going to ask another one on behalf of those sponsors. Where can I find more information on materials needed for pre-qualification?
So on our website, we definitely have a pre-qualification section where you can learn about it. Also we do have a recorded webinar that goes over the pre-qualification process as well.
Another pre-qualification question, just to make sure, if I'm an artist, do I need to pre-qualify or is it just my fiscal sponsor?
Just your fiscal sponsor. Human beings, artists, do not interact with any of our platforms. You work with your fiscal sponsor that will interact with through their organization credentials with those platforms to get your application in.
And again, can I apply as an artist if my employer is an arts organization applying for a NYSCA grant?
You can, as long as they're not serving as your fiscal sponsor.
Do artists submit final reports or do the sponsoring organizations submit final reports?
It's an online process, so they do it with their credentials, but they will need to work with you to get the information they need in order to successfully fill out the final report. So that's part of that two-way relationship for the final report. But artists do not file their own final reports. the sponsor organization is responsible to file it through their credentials on the NYSCA website currently.
For a New York State-based sponsoring organization, can we sponsor an artist who is not a New York State resident?
Nope. Our focus is on current New York State resident artists. And we do have criteria that are articulated very clearly in the guidelines in terms of the kinds of proof of residency, if you're sponsoring someone, that you want to ensure they have, if you're not sure that they actually live in New York State. If there are any other sort of wonky scenarios with halftime, quarter time, being away, you can always call staff to like suss those specific situations out. But generally, no.
How do I know if my organization is a service organization and therefore eligible to support more than one artist in each category?
Give me a call and we can definitely discuss that if you feel like, oh, we're really a service organization. But generally speaking, I'm going to say this. If you produce or present programming, artistic programming, especially if those artists would be part of those presentations that you're producing, you're probably not in line to be considered a service organization for our purposes. And again, it's not to say that you're not providing services, but this is for the purposes of being able to actually submit multiple opportunities and requests on behalf of artists within the same discipline area. Again, any organization can submit one request in each of our 8 discipline areas. So that's a lot already if you don't do this as a service, generally speaking. So just keep that in mind. That is possible. That's okay.
Can I use funds from this grant to produce a film festival?
Well, again, the spirit of these grants, these are creative grants for the creation, development, conceiving, developing, and otherwise completing new work. That's programmatic activity. That would not in any way in an application be successful in terms of support for artist grants. Again, the focus is new creative work, not the producing or presenting of existing work or others or work by others in this case.
I'm going to take the next one, half of which is similar to what you just said. This question is, I write poetry and run an open mic reading series. Do I qualify? The answer is you qualify to submit a proposal on behalf of your poetry. Any writers, any literary writers, you can feel free to get in touch with me since that's my area. Writers can submit, they're working on perhaps a collection of poetry or a novel or a graphic novel or some experimental literary form. Or if you are a literary translator and you're translating some piece of literature from another language, you can be supported in that work as well. If you have any questions about what we consider literature or your type of project, again, you can reach out to me. The part about running an open mic series, that's great, but you can't apply to this opportunity to get support for that. That falls in the category of what Arian was just talking about, where it is presenting others' work. It's not the creation of new work. So we can't support you running a reading series or you editing something or you running a writing workshop. That's programmatic work. And this opportunity, again, is for an individual or team to create new work. Okay.
Sounds right.
So this artist has a question about they are working on a project that's going to span multiple years. Can they apply this year for the creation expenses and some public activities such as an in-progress showing or workshop? Or do they need to wait until next year because the project will be completed in 2025?
Right. So very good question. Again, these grants are designed for as a creative fee for the creation of new work, exactly how it's being described. And especially if you're having some kind of workshop and or in-process presentations as part of the funding year, that's meeting our public presentation component. Again, it doesn't have to be finished, completed, or have a world premiere, for example, or a final run in the funding year. That can happen outside of that because that's not exactly what we're funding. But as long as there's some kind of public performance or presentation relating to the project that can qualify to fulfill that requirement. So everything that I'm hearing from that question is good to go.
Okay. Can two collaborators for a specific project apply separately for the same project?
Fortunately, no. It's a one project, one lead artist rule in the same year. I will say this, say you're a collaborating team and you work on multiple projects over time. One person could be the lead artist on one project this year, and the other person could be the lead artist on another project in the following year, as long as it's a different project. You know, that's a different artist seeking funding for something they're working on. So that's how it applies. Otherwise, the same project and artist must sit out a year before they can come back if they want to apply again. Now, if you're successful and you receive the grant, we no longer fund anything. You know, that's considered a funded creative project. You don't want to come back with that for further funding down the line.
Does the sponsoring organization have to show that they have presented arts or have an arts focus?
No. The sponsoring organization, no. It could be any nonprofit can serve as a fiscal sponsor. Again, they could relegate their role to simply, you know, disseminating and transmitting and transacting the actual application and if it's successful, the grant itself. So it could be any nonprofit can qualify, as long as they're qualified, right, as we discussed earlier, can serve as in that role of fiscal sponsor to an artist.
If a project is currently untitled or has a working title that might change, what's the best way to go about filling out the project title in the application?
Yeah, you can just refer to that notion somewhere early in the introduction. Working title is blah, blah, blah. Some folks have even, you know, used untitled, and then they describe what they want to do, even though they're not sure what the title is just yet. We often have, not often, but we definitely get applications where, they receive a grant and under the application materials, it was one title. And then when they finally got to the finish line, it became a different title. That's okay. In those cases, you would just submit whatever that title change was, like an update as part of the final report itself. That's due basically after the contract period by February, the year after, the end of February.
If my organization was funded for a Support for Artists grant last year, can we apply again with a different artist this year?
Yes. Yes. The sponsors are not precluded from sponsoring an artist every year as long as it's a different artist. Yes, that's perfectly fine. And I encourage that. We encourage that.
Can you be a panelist and apply for a grant in this category?
Right. So since these are so particular and the rubric is one criteria, if you're on our panel roster, you can certainly be on our panel roster. But if while you're in the panel roster, you have a year that you submitted an application, we wouldn't invite you to serve on panel that year. It would just be too close of a conflict of interest since you have, sort of your hat in the ring, so to speak. But you can still be on the roster. You would sit out that year, and then you could serve the following year. Now, we do have a sit-out rule, right? So if you applied this year, you can then sort of submit to be a panelist to serve starting next year. And just keep in mind, in general, once you're approved as a panelist, you are on our roster for 3 years, and then you must rotate off. And that's the idea, that we have folks over time serving in this capacity.
Here's a question about the requirement for a public presentation during the contract year. Can that public presentation or workshop be virtual?
Yes, we'll accept it.
And someone would like you to reiterate the difference between a service organization and other types of organizations.
I thought I did a little bit earlier on top of my initial presentation. Call me. But again, if you provide ongoing produced or presented programs, you're likely not artistic programs. You're not likely not a service organization for our purposes. But again, call me, we can discuss it.
Okay, and I know you answered this one before, but it has come up a few additional times, so I'm just going to say it one more time as well. Can a creative project be funded by NYSCA more than one time? And if so, what's the waiting period to apply again?
Right. If you've applied years past, we did allow for sort of, especially in media grants, like sort of different phases of funding to come back. These current opportunities are lent as a creative grant. It's one time only for that project. So as an artist, once you receive funding, you know, and a few years later, you can come back with another project, but not to further fund a previously funded project. One time, once it's successful. Now, if you weren't successful, you sit out the year, and that project that you originally applied for is still not completed, and you feel like, okay, it's maybe farther along, but this $10,000 maybe will help me get it to that final phase. You can certainly submit again with the same project that way.
Is screenwriting film, media, or literature? What categories should they pick if they are a screenwriter?
Good point. If it's meant to be for you know, time-based as opposed to a live play, the appropriate panel would be the film, media, and new technology panel opportunity. It would be in that area. Now, just remember though, as you apply for that, it's really for the filmatic work. So even though you might be like, I'm writing the screenplay at this point, that would be under pre-production, which is possible, certainly the case. But you definitely want to speak to sort of your idea for fundraising to get the film done. It's still about getting the film done, not simply writing the project. In terms of if you want to be, you know, more competitive in that scenario.
Can you already be engaged in creating your project right now and will be continuing to work on it in 2024 to be eligible?
Good question. The focus is new work, but yes, it doesn't mean that it has to begin from scratch in the funding year. You can certainly be in process now. In those cases, you definitely want to just own that in your narrative application portion, in terms of what you've done, where you are, what you'll be doing in terms of service of this continuing creative process for that project in the funding year, and then ultimately where you see it sort of have its final sort of presentation, performance, or iteration of it.
Okay, I think this question is asking, does the person type, does the project has to be in NYC? So I think that means, does the final product have to be something that is presented in New York State?
Okay, I'm going to answer that a couple of ways because I think that actually could be a few things. The world premiere of a thing doesn't have to be in New York State as long as you provided some kind of public performance or presentation of it, right, during your creative time with it. Certainly, it can work out that that's the case, and it's in New York State. That's great. But that's one response. The other response is the theme of the proposed project doesn't have to be New York City or New York State based. You know, we're open to all kinds of engaging and interesting work in terms of thematically, right? You don't get points either if it's New York based necessarily. And I think the final part to that question is, hey, what if I'm doing, like, say, a documentary that's the subject is in India or some other country or somewhere else outside of New York State, and I might be filming there. Well, you're the New York State artist that's getting the creative fee, and if that takes you there, that's fine. We funded, especially documentaries, international documentaries over the years. Obviously, you live here, you pay taxes here, for example, and also odds are that part of your team, if not a good portion of your team, either currently or in post-production, will be based out of New York anyway.
Are podcasts eligible for support for artist grants?
Okay, what I would say about this, I'm going to sort of change that podcast to serialized or series material, anything that's a series. Okay, that's acceptable. Media-based series, that's acceptable. But it should be in the service of season one, leading up to maybe the pilot episode, for example. Okay, because if it's already something that already has a whole season behind it, it's up on the website, it's been consumed, and it's really for the second season, that really starts to get away from our sort of focus on new work. So hopefully that's clear for everyone the way I phrased it.
Is there a standard letter of agreement that NYSCA uses or recommends using for working with an artist over the year? So this would be between the artist and their sponsor.
Yeah, we do not. I mean, for legal and otherwise, there are many variables in these kinds of relationships. So we don't. We do, a general service organization that anyone who's a current grantee has a basic membership to is NYCON. And I would say that, they sort of have legal minds that can provide that kind of feedback and maybe even sample materials potentially. So I would refer you to our partner, NYCON, that provides these general kinds of behind-the-scenes services. And that stands for New York Council. Go ahead.
Sorry. Our organization houses a record label. Can we apply with an artist to support the production of an album that will be released on our label, or is that a conflict of interest?
Right. If they're not on staff, or otherwise on the board, I assume, first of all, this is a nonprofit organization. So you said record label. But if it's nonprofit, okay, fair game. If it's a collaborating artist that's not otherwise on payroll as a staff member or on the board of directors, yes, that can be okay. Again, we're not funding the production of the LPs per se. It would be the creative fee for them to sort of score the music that would go on those LPs. That's the way to think about these grants in that case.
All right, I'm going to take this literature-based question. Can I present a project where I wrote the material and translated it to? And is any genre like poetry or short story considered? Yes, any literary genre is considered. You can apply for either the creation of the work or for the translation of it. It's the translation of a work from a foreign language into English that is considered. So you would just have to decide which, it depends on what you're working on now, I guess, or what you will be working on in 2024. So in 2024, if you're still developing your poetry collection in the original language, then that's what you would apply for. But if at that point you will be translating it from whatever language into English, that's the box that you would check essentially. In most cases where we see translations, it's usually a team, and that translation fee goes to the translator for translating the work from the foreign language into English. And I would say that similar to the example Arian just gave with the composer and the record label, a publisher can apply on behalf of a translator that they're working with or on behalf of a writer that they're going to publish. Again, the fee is for that writer to write their work, for their creative element. It's not for, the editorial process, et cetera. And is there a NYSCA prepared press release template we can work from to recruit artists?
We don't have that, but please feel free to email our public information office to see about any sort of at least best practices around that.
As a lead artist, what information do we have to share about our collaborating artists?
Sure. In the narrative portion, you want to speak to who they are and how and what the relationship is in terms of who's handling what within the team. And that's in the essay format part of the application, right? And then additionally, as the support materials, that would be a case where you want to submit their resumes. Now, some folks say, hey, can it be a bio? Well, the bio can be part of that narrative structure. We do ask specifically for a resume, only because the sort of technical skills tend to be on a resume in a way that are not on a bio. And that's really the kind of information we're looking for in those cases. So if you have a collaboration, you want to, in addition to your own resume as a lead artist, provide the resumes of the key collaborators that you speak to in the application as part of your overall packet. Resumes should not be more than 2 pages each. And, if it's a huge team, no more than 5 total, counting the lead artist.
So here's an artist saying they're going to propose work that's relatively new to their practice. So they're going in a different artistic direction than they've gone in the past. Do you have advice for how to present this approach in the narrative?
Yeah, no, exciting. This idea of what our grants represent to the artistic development of an artist at this point in time is something that we charge the panel with to think about. So Own it. I would say first own it. I'm from this sort of area or expertise, and I am pivoting into this new sort of milieu. But here's where my background and my previous whatever that is, I feel will inform my work that I'm proposing that I may be new to, but otherwise informs that work that I'm proposing before you. I would say that I would, couch it around those terms. Definitely own it.
When you say this grant doesn't fund media production, what aspects of production does the grant cover? Is it for pre-production only? Does it cover any filming, editing? Thank you.
Aha. Okay, so the way, and this is in media in the past, we did have a media production grant years past. So the way they're lensed now, even for media, these are creative grants. So it's a creative fee for you to do your work as an artist. We do allow and that is one of the questions actually under media where the sponsors have to select, is it pre-production, production, or post-production? So all three phases are available. It doesn't matter if it's a documentary or any other media project, all three phases are available for this opportunity. And you want to think of it as a creative fee, that if you're successful, once you receive that creative fee as the artist, if you're self-producing, you can basically deploy it however you need towards that project. But it's essentially first and foremost a creative fee to conceive, develop, or otherwise complete the work.
As a sponsoring organization, I had a volunteer for over a year who's a writer and playwright. I recently put them on paid staff now for 1 month. If they went back to a volunteer position, could I sponsor them?
Yeah, I mean, if they have no fiduciary say over the organization, if they were generally a volunteer, that's not a staff member, that meets our criteria, they can apply. The key element is, do they have say over the organization? That's where the board element, even though you might be a volunteer on the board, but you're on the board, comes into play. Really what we're trying to avoid, that somehow these grants are subsidizing what would be someone's fee for doing work that's not related to the creative work. That's the whole point with this. So just keep that in mind and, follow your due diligence on that point.
Another collaboration question. As a lead artist, do we have to list everyone on your creative team? I am still in the process of building it. That's
a really good question. I would say, similar to the previous, own that. And I think what the panel likes to know is that if you don't have them in place, that you're aware of the kinds of expertise you need to be successful in that project that you're proposing, okay? And this tends to be true for media specifically, but just any collaboration situation, this would apply. So that's the way I would counsel you to sort of couch when you speak to that bullet, right, in the narrative.
All right, so we are at noon, so we're just going to take one or two more quick questions and then wrap up. This one is, can your project change at the completion of the grant? Say a documentary was submitted and funded, but towards the end of the project, it shifts to something that is not a documentary.
That particular one's a tricky one. We didn't review something that's not the proposed project. But there are instances where it kind of morphs into something, but it's still in the spirit of what was approved for funding. Usually themes within a play, for example, movements within a musical piece for composer compositions. Those are the ones that come into mind. If the theme is the same, maybe, and it's like, look, we set out to do this documentary, and then we realized, as a documentary, this isn't going to work. We want to do, a fictional version of this concept, but it's still in line with what was proposed. That certainly can be acceptable. Something like that, I would just say, call me and we can discuss those specific situations. That goes for the sponsor artist. What cannot happen is, especially, we get this a lot from the sponsoring organization, it's not working out for whatever reason and allocate it to a different artist. That cannot happen. It's meant for the artist on record, because that's who the panel reviewed along with the project. Also, a completely different project. They applied for score, but they want to direct a play. I'm just making that up. That's not what they applied for. That's not what the recommendation for funding was based on. for the person to direct something rather than to create a score. Hopefully that clarifies.
And last question, does the public component have to be interactive, or could it be, for example, a video of behind the scenes stuff that's then presented to an audience?
Well, then I'm hearing there's an audience. So at some point it can't be, I recorded something, I uploaded it, and people can come see it if they find it. You have to promote it as a live event. That's what I would say to really, for us to be able to basically green light that and say, okay, you met the requirement.
Yeah,
So
I think
that
they were
clarifies.
asking if it has to have like a Q&A or something where the audience participates, and that is not part of the requirement, correct?
No.
Okay, so I think that's going to be our last question because we are at time.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christine.
And I'll step in to say thank you, Arian and Christine. That concludes today's webinar. A reminder that this webinar has been recorded and will be posted on the NYSCA website along with the presentation deck. A reminder also that tomorrow's webinar is support for targeted opportunities at 11 a.m. and there is still time to register. Our office hours will be shared this coming Friday, so please check the NYSCA website for the full schedule and registration links. Once again, thank you so much for joining today. It's been wonderful sharing this virtual space with you. We look forward to receiving your applications by July 13th. Thank you and have a great day.